Well, hey, what's going on? Welcome into Chatterbox Reds. Nick Kirby joined by my pal Austin Layton. Going to talk a little Reds baseball as we inch closer to the winter meetings. Big rumor hit the rumor mill online on Wednesday. We'll talk about that. Before we get to Austin and all of our topics today, as always, we are sponsored by Deep South Commodities. DSC is a leader in renewable commodities for biofuel production, specializing in used cooking oil collection, aggregation, and sales. Visit www.deepsouthcommodities.com for more information. Thanks as always to our friends at DSC. All right, Austin, how you doing, my friend? How was your Thanksgiving?
Hey, good. Yeah, it's we were talking a little bit offline. I'm a outside of the Reds, I'm a huge Buckeye fan. So both basketball and obviously football have been a rough past week or so at this point. So excited to talk some Reds. The good news about the offseason is the Reds can't lose. They can't win, I guess, either, but it's good time to play basically some fantasy baseball with these moves and whatnot, which we'll get into. So I'm excited to talk about it. But I hope you had a good Thanksgiving too.
Yeah, I did. Thanks, Austin. And yeah, I don't think as many people were planning on looking to the Reds for optimism and football in the state of Ohio, but here we are. We'll try to bring it for you if you need that today. Well, Austin, a wild rumor came across on Wednesday morning that the Reds and the Cubs are the two teams that are the most, quote, viable candidates to land White Sox ace Garrett Crochet. Crochet was a really, really good pitcher in 2024, his first year as a starter. We'll talk a little bit more about him and his backstory here in a little bit. But Austin, after the Reds just added Brady Singer, after they just signed Nick Martinez, what was your kind of initial thoughts on this?
My initial thought was, man, holy crap, the Reds are making some aggressive, at least discussions and whatnot compared to recent years. So I was surprised, at least from that regard, and kind of surprised at not only the fact that we were just in the discussion, but the fact that we were in a discussion for another pitcher. I had to figure maybe after the Martinez and Singer kind of deals that we maybe would focus more towards the outfield. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit too. But initially I was surprised, but then looking into obviously his stats, it's a guy that you want to be in the discussions for if you're in it, and you hit on it a little bit too with that quote unquote viable. I don't know what necessarily that even means as far as what the reports led to be viable, if they heard that we're actually talking between the clubs, or they just think that, hey, this would be a good landing spot for him just based on our makeup. But I think you hit it on the head. His last year was very good. I think he was on somewhat of an innings limit, if I hear that correctly, from what I've been reading, at least, coming off of an injury, Tommy John, a couple years back, and coming out of the bullpen, things like that. So at the face of it, I think it could be a really good improvement to maybe somebody in our current rotation. But it's just, whenever you see these trade talks, you kind of got to realize we got to give something up in return, and we don't really know what that is at this point, obviously. But I don't know. I was overall kind of intrigued and then kind of liking the idea, but I guess it just depends on what we give up. But I'd be curious to see your thoughts too, obviously.
Yeah, as always with one of these deals, what are you giving up for him? I mean, that's first and foremost. I mean, sure, yeah, I'd love to have a Garrett Crochet on my roster, but am I willing to pay the price that it takes to get him? I don't know about that. Yeah, Crochet was the 11th overall pick in 2020, a draft that has really not been kind to the Reds and a lot of teams. There's just a lot of big misses in that draft, but Crochet's been certainly anything but that. The White Sox, who were really, it sounds funny to say now, were really competitive when he got drafted in 2020. They had a really good roster. They looked like one of the teams on the rise. They pitched him in the bullpen somewhat, I think, because he had a lot of injuries, somewhat also just because it was kind of the best way to kind of get him on the roster and help the team right away. And then, as you mentioned, he had Tommy John surgery in 2022, did not pitch at all. Last year, coming back, only pitched in 13 games, all in relief. And then this year, the White Sox kind of surprising. It was a surprising move that they moved him to the rotation to start the year. I even remember he was named the opening day starter, and there was a lot of like White Sox fans and stuff kind of making fun of that idea because, oh, they're using their reliever. This would be kind of like if the Reds next year said Fernando Cruz is our opening day starter. Like that's, I kind of think what it felt like for White Sox fans. But he was incredible this year. He had a 3.58 ERA in 32 starts. That 3.58 ERA is misleading. He was way more dominant than that. I think people think the White Sox, they just were an atrocious ball club, because they had no hitters. They had not very many good pitchers other than Crochet. They also were an atrocious defensive team. So he had to kind of deal with that. And you look at some of his other statistics like fielding and independent pitching, 2.69 FIP. So he should have been a lot better than that. But my last thing before we kind of continue this discussion, you mentioned the innings limit. And boy, was there ever an innings limit with him. So he was the dominant pitcher early in the year. It was dominant pitcher all year, but he gets close to the trade deadline, and Crochet's this hot topic at the trade deadline because everyone would want him. Well, Garrett Crochet apparently had his agent tell teams that he would not pitch in the playoffs if he was traded unless he got an extension from the team that traded to him before. And he did not get traded at the deadline because I don't think any team wanted to deal with that. Especially, the asking price then. But get this, after July, or actually it goes even further, actually after June 30th, he did not go more than 4 innings in a start the rest of the year. I mean, and he was going 7 and 6 and 6 pretty regularly early in the year.
It would fit right in here.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're talking. I'll just read it to you just so you kind of get the picture. 4-2. This is innings. 4 innings, 2 innings. 4-3, 4, 2 in the third, 4-4. I guess he didn't get a batter. I don't know what happened August 27th if he got hurt or something. 3 in the third, 2, and then he had 3 straight 4 even to end the season. So they were really limiting his innings down the stretch. Now again, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Especially with kind of given where the White Sox were. There was no motivation to push him, beyond his limits. But it does that is kind of red. I don't want to say red flag. I don't know what's the yellow flag number 1 on him is, okay, he had an incredible first year as a starter, but as we often see with starters, that second year while you're trying to build up your innings, there could be some rough patches there. Is that kind of how you see it?
Yeah, for sure. And especially a guy that's coming off of a couple years, removed from Tommy John. And to your point, last year was his first year that he ever, was a starter. So you don't know if, durability is going to be an issue long term. You don't know if, that additional workload of trying to, not cap your innings is going to, get the Reds in a position where they sign this guy or, trade, prospects for him, obviously. And then they end up, with a guy that's on the IL for, a better part of the year. And would he be, I can't remember if I was seeing, would we basically have 2 years of club control if he came over here? Or is it just 1 or 2?
It's just 2. It's just 2. I mean,
2.
for a guy that it was his first year as a starter, you think, oh, he's probably got several years of control. No, they burned a lot of years. And that Tommy John year counts as a year of service time because he was on the big league roster. So it's just 2025 and 2026. So again, I would be a lot less apprehensive if, you still have 3 or 4 years. Okay. If maybe he has some growing pains in 2025, no problem. That's okay. You can, that happens, but you're buying him for 2 years. So you kind of need him to
Yeah.
be great those 2 years.
And maybe, I mean, the 2 years, I guess, roughly fits in with kind of the quote unquote window for the Reds, right? 3 years, Terry Francona kind of seems like that's kind of almost the Ellie De La Cruz deadline of 3, basically 3 years. So it would fit in with that regard. But yeah, I mean, as a trade overall for the organization, I think you would kind of want some longevity, especially the things that I was reading into, or the White Sox would likely be looking into some position players. But I'd have to also imagine we'd bundle in maybe one of our current, guys that have been in the starting rotation for pitching to go along with it. So, do you give up a guy like Lodolo or, somebody even towards like the end of it, like Abbott or things like that, and then position player from the minor leagues? So, are we giving up Edwin Arroyo with that? It just becomes a kind of a weird position where you don't want to screw up the organization long term for, potentially a very good starter. Let's, be honest, for 2 years if he could stay healthy. But it's just the balancing act of to get somebody good, you usually have to give some at least a couple guys that are good in return, especially if they're prospects.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would hurt to get him, but it should hurt to get him. I mean, if you were a White Sox fan, you would want to get a haul back for him, and that's totally what you would expect. Let's run through some of you mentioned trading a current pitcher, and I think that is probably one of the pieces that I would require. Either one of the top starters, or even I'll read through them all that I think could be that I think you'd at least have to throw one of them. Hunter Green's obviously out. I think Brady Singer's is out. I don't think those two are going to be. So and I think Nick Martinez obviously is out. So you're looking at Andrew Abbott, Nick Lodolo, Rhett Lauder. You're looking at Chase Burns. You're looking at um, Chase Petty. I don't think Connor Phillips maybe would get in there, but I don't think he's like your premier piece. Am I missing any other starters? Did I say Lodolo?
Not unless you consider Ashcraft a premier piece, but I don't think
Yeah,
they would in this scenario. But
I think Ashcraft will kind of be more in the Phillips category of an extra piece. So,
mhm.
um, I saw a lot of people, maybe you throw in Andrew Abbott. If I'm the Chicago White Sox, I'm kind of wanting guys with more control. Abbott's already used a year of service time. I just don't really see Abbott being the guy. And Abbott also, as good as a pitcher as he's been the first 2 years, I don't really see a lot of additional upside with him. I don't think Abbott is an option on here. Um, I definitely don't think Lodolo is the option. I've seen that thrown out there. I mean, Lodolo is a free agent after the 2027 season, so he only has 3 years left. So you're trading a guy with 2 years of control for a guy with 3. I don't really see why that would benefit the White Sox. So really, it comes down to, I think, Rhett Lauder, Chase Burns, and Chase Petty. I'm not trading Burns. That's off the table. I mean, for 2 years of control, that would be nuts, in my opinion. This is the number 2 pick in the draft. You need to have a little bit more faith that your number 2 pick in the draft is going to be a long-term answer that you can get 6 good years out of. So I think no chance I'm trading him. The White Sox would obviously be thrilled to get him. So really, I think we've narrowed it down, if you agree with me, Austin, to Rhett Lauder and Chase Petty. Lauder would be tough. I think I could maybe be convinced, but Lauder still has 6 full seasons of controls. You're trading 6 for 2.
Yeah, and I kind of put, for me at least, I put Louder in kind of that Burns category of like guys I just really don't want to get rid of at this point, just because one, like you mentioned, the control, and obviously we've seen Louder towards the end of last year with the Reds and haven't seen Burns yet, but I think both could be kind of integral parts of our rotation for years to come. And yeah, the Lodolo is kind of the comp that I've seen, thrown out there, and it's almost a like for like with their injury history. I think Crochet obviously had a better year last year, numbers and innings wise, but it's interesting because then none of the options, at least if I'm the White Sox, like any of those options that we don't want to get rid of probably aren't going to be enough to move the needle for them. So then it's like, all right, what other guys, position player wise, are we going to potentially throw in? Would they, I mentioned Edwin and Arroyo, but would they consider somebody like Novelli, Marte in there, CES or something like that? Guys that aren't necessarily quote unquote, prospects because they've had some big league time, but they're still, relatively young in their, major league record. But so it's you got to always look at it from the White Sox perspective of they've got this guy that's probably their ace at least right now, and they're gonna not want Graham Ashcraft in return basically. So it gets to the point where you might be giving up too much for, like I said at the beginning, a position of the starting rotation where you get Martinez, you get Singer, I'm kind of okay with filling it out with the guys that we have. You can never have too much pitching, but I don't know if we necessarily need to give up kind of future cornerstones to add more. I don't know if you agree with me on that.
Yeah, I agree completely. I don't think there's going to be a trade that's going to get the Reds over the hump that I'm going to be, that I'm good with that. I just don't see that happening. Now it's fun to talk about it and we can kind of, look into it, but I doubt that I'm going to get to that point. In terms of like adding more pitching, I have no problem with that. If Rhett Lauder has to start the year in AAA because the Reds rotation is too good, oh my God, what a terrible problem to have, Austin. How are we going to survive? We have a good pitcher in AAA just waiting for someone to get hurt and he comes back up. Like, that's not a problem. This is things that
It's not a
good
problem we've
teams.
had recently.
Yeah. This is the kind of problems you want to have. So I have no problem bringing another one. I actually am kind of concerned about the Reds' depth starting pitching wise. The Reds have this weird thing going on where like 1 through 7 and maybe 8 if you want to throw Burns in there starting pitching wise, it's as good as maybe I can remember. But beyond that, there's not a whole lot of guys that I really look in the minor league system that I feel like, oh yeah, he could, get me 6 weeks to survive some injuries. And the Reds used 11 starting pitchers. That's not counting openers last year. And you can use a lot more than that. You can use 15 starting pitchers in a year throughout your organization. So I totally fine with adding more pitching. And especially Crochet, he right now would be your number 2 behind Hunter Green, maybe number 1. I mean, as much as I love Hunter Green, I mean, that's 1A, 1B. So it's a totally different conversation. But I have no issues adding more pitching. I have no issues just completely going all in on the pitching. But my problem is not too much pitching at all. My problem is giving up too much.
Yeah, and it's at least. I mean, I haven't really seen much reporting other than the initial kind of tweet this morning, or earlier in the day, whenever that was. At this point, it all blends together. But so I don't know. It seems like we might be going into something that's maybe just very early talks and isn't even that big of a hypothetical. And I know we'll talk about this soon, but the winter meetings coming up, it kind of seems like the focus is away from pitching for the Reds, just from kind of some stuff we've gotten from Mark Sheldon and Nick Kroll comments, things like that. But I don't know. I think I don't see them necessarily making a trade for a pitcher at this point. Just, I mean, think about if we did. This would be one of the most active Reds off seasons just in itself of recent years, and that's without kind of shoring up the outfield, like I think you and I have talked about before that they kind of need to do. So I don't know. The thing that I would be afraid of is if you end up trading some pieces for Crochet, what do you have left in the tank for trading for an outfielder or another corner infielder or something like that. So I don't know. I don't necessarily see it. It's interesting to talk about, but I say I don't see it happening. It'll probably happen like right after we get done recording this. But it's just not something I guess I see in the cards as much.
It is worth mentioning that there's been several times, I can't think of all the examples, I can think of one where the Reds have been involved with these top pitchers. It feels like the Reds always try to check in or always try to kind of be in, but they never want to give up enough or pay enough. I remember Zach Wheeler, the Reds were high on him, or one of the, I think, finalists for him before he ended up ultimately going to Philadelphia. So the Reds, I think, they try to get their nose into all this, which is great. I want them to be in as many types of discussions, and and I also want them to stand their ground and not give up too much. And I think that's healthy. I mean, I think you should be involved with as many of these talks as you can, but also really, be able to, stand pat and not, go too far. I know a lot of people are probably saying, Nick, who would you give up for him? So I'll kind of maybe throw out some hypothetical packages that I could maybe be okay with. I'll start with the players that I am absolutely no way I'm trading for Garrett Crochet. I mentioned Burns on the prospect list. I'm not trading Marte. I know a lot of people they're down on Marte. I'm writing out Marte more. I mean, this guy was a top 25 prospect. I'm not giving him up. I'm not giving up Cam Collier. He's absolutely a no on my list. I think he's the most undervalued prospect in the Red system. Pipeline has him 5 right now. I think he's up there. Edwin Arroyo, I don't think I want to give him up. Maybe I'm a little more, he's below Collier, but I still don't feel good about him. And then the other one is Alfredo Duno. That's a do not touch for me. He's a catcher. No, the Reds need catching. They need a guy with significant upside. Those are my untouchables. So if I'm talking a package, Lauder, Stewart, Rhett Lauder, Sal Stewart, and maybe a guy like Hector Rodriguez or Ricardo Cabrera. That's probably the kind of package that I think it might take that I could maybe be okay with. But I think they're going to get a better offer than that.
Yeah, you would have to imagine. And I was trying to think through kind of guys outside of what you've named. And I guess I don't know the White Sox needs as much as I probably should to put something like that together. But
It's
I'm looking
anything.
at kind of, yeah, anybody that can do anything. Yeah. Uh, Likewise with the Reds for the most part. But no, because I was trying to think of like positions that we have excess of, right? And we've got a lot of outfielders, but I don't think any of them are going to be, trade pieces that people are interested in, giving up an ace for. Just, maybe somebody like Spencer Steer or something like that. But I just I put it in the same category of guys I just don't really want to get rid of. Now I don't think he's untouchable necessarily. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just trying to think. I think they probably would want prospect type guys, but at the same time, if you can give them some guys that have produced at the big league level, that's certainly something they would probably listen to. Um, but yeah, and going back to Marte, I think I'm kind of in the same boat with you on that. Just last year was a weird year for him, being out the first half basically for, the suspension. And I just don't think he could ever really get in much of a groove because the year before, I mean, limited sample size, he showed some flashes. And, I think if I was the Reds, I'd be willing to give him kind of a full quote unquote normal year and kind of see where that goes. But yeah, that's a tough part of this. And that's, I guess, going back to why I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense to definitely pull the trigger or anything like that, just because there doesn't seem to really be any great answers, at least that I can think of for it.
Yeah, I have a hard time selling this low on Noelve Marte. I want to ride it out a little bit more. I mean, and maybe riding out a little bit more is to the trade deadline 2024. But do we really think if Noelve Marte has a kind of bad season in AAA, that his trade value right now and add on 2 more bad months in AAA really plummets that much? I don't think so. I think I want to at least give him another half of a season, give him a fresh start, and kind of see what he can do. But yeah, and I don't know. I don't think they're interested in Steer either. Steer only has 4 years of control left. He's already burned 2. If I'm a team like the White Sox, like I want 6 years of control guys as my centerpieces, because they need so much. But yeah, fun, interesting conversation. We'll see. I know the other piece of this, Austin. I know a lot of people have also said, well, let's package Luis Robert with Garrett Crochet. I hear that. I like Luis Robert. He's a talented player. But Luis Robert's pretty expensive. Like this is not a guy on a rookie contract. He's a guy that signed a contract extension. He's still owed math on the fly here. He's still owed 55 million over the next 3 years. Just 3 years left. That's 55 million. I mean, if Luis Robert was a free agent, would he get much? Would he get 3 years, 55 million on the open market?
Probably not from the Reds.
Well, I mean, from anyone, would you get that from anyone? I mean, I know he's a talented player. He had some really great years, but he's coming off a year that he wasn't. He was, I think he had 89 WRC plus. He was below average. Like, would he get 3 years, 55 million on the open market?
Yeah, I don't think so. And I'll just look it up his Spotrac site here too. But yeah, 2 years looks like left club control. that's where it gets tricky because you got to, at least for me, I always just try to think like, oh, the Reds are a small market team. We got to kind of pump the brakes on this stuff. If we were, rolling in the Dodgers payroll, maybe something like that could happen. But I think we all want this to be kind of the off season that the Reds make a lot of moves and kind of solidify the, next 3 years of postseason runs. But I'm just skeptical based on recent years. Now, I do think the Reds, at least when they have seen that there's a quote unquote window, like, and it's super obvious, they tend to pull the trigger and actually make some moves for, Castellanos and Sonny Gray and guys like that. Moustakas, not that that worked out great, but and even going back to like the 2010 to 2013 run, I think the Castellanos probably would be willing to spend some money. And we've gotten, obviously the reports that they're willing to, keep the payroll at last year's level or even above. But I just don't think this is the way to really do it. But I mean, the Robert part of it would at least solve kind of the offensive side of things that I think we still need to solve for. Um, but pairing those guys both together, I mean, what's the return on that they want back from the Reds? You know what I mean? Like, we're giving up probably some dogs at that point.
Yeah, I mean, Luis Robert for me is almost like okay, he's a throw in because of how much he's making. Again, like I said, I don't know if he's getting that much money, Garrett, that much money on the open market. Now it's worth mentioning he's owed 15 million in 2025, and then 2026 and 2027 are both $20 million, but they are team options. So you could decline that, but if the Reds are getting this guy back, you want to think they're accepting that. So I mean, I guess it's not necessarily guaranteed, but then what's the point, right? So
unless we give up a contract like Candelario in return or something like that. But
there you
I
go.
don't
There
know.
you go.
Just
There you
just
go.
doing the math
That's
is math, and
yeah, but again, the team like the White Sox, like
right.
that
They don't
as
want
having
that probably.
five people show up to their games next year, are they really gonna, you know, they're wanting to dump money. They're not gonna want to, pay anyone anything extra. So that is a creative way that I haven't heard. Also, that's really interesting, and I like that. Yeah, that would be a way that I can make these dollars work. But Luis Robert for me is an add-on. I'll take him, but I'm not giving up anything additional for Luis Robert just because if I'm spending that much money, I'm just going to go sign a free agent, right? I mean, I'm
Right.
just getting like there's free agent outfielders that are going to be making 15 to 20 million dollars a year that I don't give up anything for. So, um,
Exactly.
that's kind of where I'm at on that. Any other final thoughts here on the big old Crochet rumor before we move on?
No, I just think going back to, I guess, maybe our original point, that it's good to see that the Reds, from what we can tell, are in talks with a lot of guys, and it's just a refreshing kind of change from recent years. So I think it at least lends well, and I think what we're about to talk about with kind of free agent discussions and obviously the winter meeting starting next week. So I think it's, even if we don't make this move, I'm just glad to be here. Glad to be in the discussions because it seems like at least we're using the phones and at least trying to stay kind of relevant in the market. So that's good to see.
Running up the cell phone minutes. All
Yeah.
right, but before we get to some more conversation about the winter meetings next week and some players that the Reds have kind of been sort of linked to, as always this time of the year, we want to remind you that you can call or text 988 anytime, day or night. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is a place to get support for anything related to mental health. Whether it's an immediate crisis, simply wanting to find out how to connect with care, or anything in between, it's a 100% confidential, secure, and anonymous way to reach out for help when you don't know where else to turn. To connect, call or text 988 or visit mantherapy.org to get help. It's okay not to be okay. And yeah, this holiday season, always want to make sure, people remember that, the 988 hotline is always there 24/7, mantherapy.org. I know this time of year could be really hard on a lot of people, and really proud, really happy that we partnered up with the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation to help get some help spread some awareness about some of the really good resources that are available. All right, so winter meetings next week, the most wonderful time of the year, sort of, especially with no Reds Fest this year. I mean, this is really the premier thing here for the offseason for the Reds. Um, the There's an article from Mark Sheldon, the official Reds.com writer, kind of talking a little bit more about the what's going on heading into the winter meetings. The quote was, "The Reds have flexibility," from his conversations with Nick Kroll. We've talked before, but if you've missed some of our conversations, the Reds have said that payroll is going to be at or above the 2024 numbers. So the Reds should still have 10, 20, 30 million, somewhere in that, depending on kind of where they end up with some of the arbitration numbers and exactly what number they're talking about. But there's a little bit of money, but not a ton of money, we believe, left. The Reds are looking for outfielders. Surprise, surprise, according to Mark Sheldon's piece. Kroll said, "We're looking to add hitters to our club. Most likely it's going to be outfielder over an infielder, but I wouldn't rule anything out." Again, you could, kind of get creative if you find the perfect match infielder wise. His other quote was, I love this quote so much. "It's the best position player you can get, being able to play defense and offense." The most beautiful quote I've read all offseason. Thank God. We're looking for some players that can play defense. So hopefully that rules out Jesse Winker. No offense to Jesse Winker. Let's get some guys that can, do both, because we don't have enough that can do both. We're going to run through the 5 players that Sheldon had mentioned in kind of short order. But before we get to that, Austin, I do kind of, from the feeling I'm getting, from what I'm reading, I think the Reds are going to be very active on the trade market this offseason, probably at the winter meetings. Maybe it goes after that. Sometimes the winter meetings are where it all happens. Sometimes it's where, the foundation's laid and, deals happen, like Shin-Soo Choo happened like a couple days before Christmas, if you remember. I think the Reds are going to be pretty active. There's also another piece from another MLB.com writer mentioned the Reds as one of the 6 teams that he thinks could make a big trade. Do you kind of get that same sense?
Yeah, and I don't know if I necessarily see that. I guess on the trade side of things, I think active in general for sure. And just going off of the Sheldon kind of article and newsletter, it seems like maybe free agency is more of the path. But I think it seems like he's going into the winter meetings. At least Nick Kroll is, with kind of a, not a blank check, but just some money that's ready to be spent, and kind of, a position of, we've got some resources. We're ready to at least get in these talks. Um, but I don't know. It seems like the overall focus seems to be maybe on free agency, just because, I don't know, basically the way that the article was written by Mark Sheldon. But I don't know. I think if I had to put a bet on it, I would say free agency. But knowing that we do kind of have some probably prospects that would be of interest to other teams, I can't rule that out, I guess, either.
Yeah. I think they'll make a trade. I think there's going to be one big trade that's going to come at some point. I think there probably will be some free agency, but I think there'll be something big. We'll see if it happens next week or not. Whether it happens next week or not, I have no idea. But I predict there will be one big trade that comes. All right, so the names on here. The first one is Michael Conforto. This is a guy that I think I've wanted the Reds to get for about 7 consecutive years. Just a left-handed bat that just feels like he would absolutely mash a Great American Ballpark. Fits the profile. Does a lot of things well. Throughout his career, he's been a good on-base guy. Career .348 on-base percentage. Solid strikeout rate in the low 20s, good walk rate. He signed a deal with the Giants. Year 1 was kind of not a disaster, but it wasn't great. Last year bounced back, pretty solid year, 112 WRC plus, hit 20 bombs in 130 games. Slightly below average corner outfielder defensively, but not a, with all due respect, Castellanos type disaster out there. I think he would be, a fine player that wouldn't be a liability. I'm all for Conforto if the price is right. I know he's another left-handed bat, and that gives you a lot of left-handed bats, but I don't really care. And he doesn't have the drastic splits, I believe.
Yeah, and Conforto is actually one of the guys that we'll talk about that I was actually pretty high on too of this list. So I think it would be, I honestly just think it would be a pretty good presence to have where you could rely on this guy to, fill a spot and kind of be that guy that we don't necessarily have to platoon, like you were saying, with the splits being the issue as much. So I'd be good with him. I guess I'd be curious, I didn't look at least what he was making last year and kind of what that projects out, but it doesn't seem like a guy that would obviously break the bank because in all this, at least the way I view it, there's kind of, if there's like a tier list of free agents, you certainly have the Soto, and then I'd even put Teoscar Hernandez kind of up high to where the Reds are probably, borderline bankroll eligible to get these guys. But at least Conforto, I think, would be kind of that middle tier where, it makes a lot of sense financially. And then obviously maybe a step down a little bit in production compared to the top tier guys, but still enough to feel like you're not getting, Jesse Winker, for the Reds or something like that.
Yeah, he was made. I think it was 2 years, 36 million. Um, if I'm correct here, um, a couple of projections of some have had him as low as $12 million. I think he probably ends up getting more than that. Um, the Athletic had 3 years, 42 million. I mean that should be a number that I think is fine. I'd probably love to see the Reds maybe try to get him down to 2 years. I think that would be more for me, and maybe the third year is an option. But yeah, Conforto is probably towards the top of my list in terms of fit. A guy that's not on this list that I've been very high home about. I was sad to see him not on this list. I don't know if it means anything. Is Tyler O'Neill? He's my number one perfect fit for the Reds, but Conforto is probably number two.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at his baseball reference page, OPS plus of 116, that's kind of a sneaky number for him. I mean, if you're just looking at like average or something, you probably wouldn't necessarily assume that, but I mean, good production for, like you said, probably not, you know, as crazy of a spend as we would think on some of these guys.
Career 705 OPS against lefties. It's not great, but it's not Jake Fraley, unplayable numbers against left-handed pitching. Last year was actually great against lefties. 284 average, 886 OPS. I always caution people when I see 1 year of really good splits against a side they don't see a lot. I mean, it's only 95 at bats. But he's had some years, several years where he's been really, really good. But even like his 2023, his bad year, his OPS was 598. That's not great, but that's still not as much of a liability as some of the other platoon split guys. So I think overall you could play him against lefties and feel okay about it. Maybe he hits, fourth or fifth against right-handed pitching, and then against left-handed pitching, he bats seventh or eighth or whatever. But yeah, I think he would be probably up towards the top of the list. The next guy, Max Kepler, a guy that also I'm pretty intrigued with. Kepler is 31 years old, will be 32 by the time the 2025 season rolls around. This guy in 2023 was great. I mean, almost a 3-win player, 123 WRC plus. Last year with the Twins, had some injuries and just never really got the season going. Had a career low outside of his 3-game first season and on base percentage is just 302, just a 94 WRC plus. But Kepler is a little different because he's a really good defender. And that's the reason, especially when you look at some of those Dick Krall quotes and, what I've been preaching really attracts me to him. I mean, this is a guy that over the last 4 years has just been a dominant defender and can play center field. Twins played him more in the corners because they had, Byron Buxton. But this is a guy that, if TJ Friedl got hurt, you feel comfortable playing him in center field, but he could also produce in right field. I'm pretty high on Kepler.
Yeah, and to your point, he seems like a guy that you could essentially put in any outfield spot and feel pretty confident in his defensive ability. I guess the thing that I never like to see is guys kind of trending downward, year over year, and that seems to be the case at least 2023 to 24 with him. Dropped down basically to a 1 wins above replacement. It looks like last year. So I think that the focus on that one would be a solid defensive improvement, which I know you're all about, Nick. So that's I know you love that, and you're right. I mean, the Reds last year defensively as a team could use any help they can get. So I think that is something that honestly gets overlooked a little bit by me and even some other people too. So I don't love it as much as some of the other guys, but I think it'll at least make sense from that regard. And especially if you're not confident in somebody like TJ Friedel's durability in the next year, and you don't really want maybe Stuart Fairchild to fill that spot, or even Will Benson could play a little bit of center and right field. But I think this would be a step up at least over kind of those backup options that we have for sure. And maybe makes those other guys more of a role player where they can platoon and be kind of more comfortable with we would be more comfortable with what they're producing, but then obviously they're comfortable with what they can hit, lefties versus righties as well.
Yeah, another guy too that's not completely unplayable against lefties. Career 655 OPS against lefties, but the last couple years he's been above 700 OPS wise against left-handed pitching. Both of the last 2 years, so another guy that fits well. And yeah, I mean Kepler. Yeah, he was down last year. Again, I wonder how much of it was the injuries, but this is a guy that really since 2016, he's had some years he's been really good. And he's had a lot of other years where he's been pretty average. But the nice thing about him is, he's going to be able to give you some value, even if he has one of those more average seasons. But obviously, Great America Ballpark's a hitter's ballpark. Feels like he's a guy that would another left-handed bat that would fit well. So yeah, I would be all in on Kepler as well. Would be completely happy with that as a free agent signing. His market is going to be interesting. I think he could get more than Conforto just because of his defense, especially if it's on a shorter term deal. I don't actually see any actual projections on him. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Someone said 6 to 10 million. I think he's going to get a lot more than that.
Yeah, just looking through some kind of the projected places that he would go. I don't see us in any ones that at least this Twins Daily article is mentioning, at least that are saying the Reds. But I don't know. That wouldn't be a guy that necessarily moves the needle for me as much as maybe some of these other guys. Um, but it isn't a bad option because I think we're both in agreement. I mean, you'd have to improve over the guys that we had on the roster last year, and I think any of the guys that we'll mention are probably a little bit marginally better than these guys that we've had on the roster compared to guys like Benson and Fraley and things like that. But I just don't know if it would be overall a huge kind of improvement for the club as much.
All right, the next one mentioned is Jurickson Profar, and this is the first one that I am not at all high on. Jurickson Profar signed for $1 million with the Padres last year, and you want to talk about one of if not the best signings of the entire offseason last year, because he was great. I mean, 839 OPS, 134 OPS plus. It was an all-star. Finished 14th in the MVP voting. He was great, but this is a guy that he was not great the year prior. Kind of been up and down. I do not like signing a guy that had a career year at 31 years old. Just feels like his price is going to be way higher than he should get.
Yeah, and on the flip side, I think if you could tell me that we're getting the guy from last year, I'm all about it. I mean, I think it'd be a great move, not only from the energy aspect, but just obviously performance-wise too. Um, and you probably know more than I do. I'd have to look at maybe what he's projected to get in the market. But yeah, I mean, talk about one of the steals of the century last year for the Padres with $1 million on these guys. So I don't know. I mean, you just look into your point, just looking at his wins above replacement last year 3.7, but I mean, you go back the years prior, he's barely at 1 for most of his career before that. So it's certainly a break from the norm for him, and it's one of those things where usually if it's above the long-term average, that average is you're gonna regress back to the average a little bit. But I don't know, man. If you could tell me that, we're getting the Jurickson profile last year on the Reds, like, sign me up. But yeah, I mean, you're looking at almost 10 years of history before that to where it's not been the case. So it would all be I guess, based on the dollar amount that we'd have to spend on something like that. Because I think to your point, he's going to demand a higher salary than $1 million, but you would hope that maybe it's nothing that I guess is too crazy. Were you able to find anything on that? I could look it up too, I guess, but
MLB trade rumors. They didn't have one for Kepler. That's what I've been using. 3 years, 45 million.
okay. So we're in
That's
Candelaria range again, but yeah.
yeah. I mean that is steep. I mean, this is a guy that the market last year determined was worth $1 million,
Right.
and one great year. Yeah, I'm with you. If he could replicate that, great. But the chances he replicates that, I don't think are high. I think you sign a 3-year deal for Jurickson Profar. That's the kind of deal that has a potential to be Candelario 2.0. I mean,
Yeah, I would have
it,
to do either one, maybe two. I don't know if I would do three, but yeah, that's a little
and
bit
he's
too steep for me.
and he's an atrocious fielder too. Career minus 49 outs above average. Last year, -6 outs above average in left field. 2023 was minus 13 in left field. This is not a good defensive player at all. So there's not a whole lot to fall back if he turns. I mean,
Yeah, and
he has to be a lot better than Max Kepler or even Michael Conforto to have value, because he's going to be a liability defensively.
yeah, and his baseball reference page actually says he's played some infield before, but I don't know if that's more of just like a Spencer Steer situation where he technically has played the infield, but he's not, and I guess the reverse of Spencer Steer, I should say, where Steer, I think, is more of a natural infielder, and this guy's maybe more of a natural outfielder that's just happened to play some infield in the past. But yeah, I could be wrong. I'm not looking at the career starts or anything on there.
Last year, he played 148 games in left field and 2 at first base, and
Right. Okay.
that was
Exactly.
it. The year before, he played 1 game, but it was 1 inning at second base, so it must
Okay.
have been one of those things.
11th
I
inning or
know.
something.
I mean, he came up. He was one of the highest prospects in baseball when he came up with the Rangers. Was I think a shortstop, played second base, third base, and I think he's kind of eventually he's mostly been a left fielder since about 2021. They pretty much have moved him out because he's a bad defensive player, and that's the place you stick the worst. And yeah, I think this is the easiest pass. The next one, Teoscar Hernandez. I mean, this is the one that I think everyone would love. I would love Teoscar Hernandez. He has some defensive concerns, but this guy's hit well enough that I wouldn't be worried. I just cannot on any planet see the Reds outbidding the market for Teoscar Hernandez. I mean, I would love to be wrong on that. 3 years, $60 million is the projection. I don't think I want to pay him that much, given his age. I can't. I don't think it's really worth it. I don't even know why he's on the list. I don't know why Mark Sheldon put him on the list, to be honest.
No, and yeah, it would be a huge overspend. If we weren't the Cincinnati Reds, basically, like I was looking at earlier, if we weren't a small market team, I think, that would factor in differently. But, and you're talking about one of the more exciting players in the playoffs last year. That was a lot of fun to watch. But yeah, I just think it's not realistic, essentially. Unfortunately, I guess I should say too.
Yeah, and I mean, again, if he was younger, I think I'd be more willing to do like I did. But he's 32 years old. He has a great track record. I mean, this guy, 2023 was his worst year, and he was still an above average hitter. But I mean, from 2020 through 2024, outside of 2023, I mean, he was he'd be the best hitter on the Reds. I mean, Ellie
Yeah.
De La Cruz could pass that, but I mean, this will be a bona fide star. I just Would I do it? Maybe, but this pretty much, if this is the Reds, this pretty much ends their offseason. I think he's probably going to get more than $60 million, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's a guy. Mark Sheldon hints at it here, and I've seen it elsewhere that the Dodgers are probably pretty interested in bringing back too. So I just don't see us obviously outbidding them in it either.
Well, and last year he signed with the Dodgers on a 1-year deal. When it was reported, I think he had multiple year offers other places, but he wanted to play for the Dodgers. So that's
Right.
what you're competing with here. You're competing with an unlimited pocketbook that can defer money through our lifetime. That also is able to get has a more attractive place because you get to play with Shohei Ohtani and the Dodgers. So
And be
yeah,
in the pennant race every year. Yeah.
I don't think it's viable at all. I don't think it's an option. I've seen people, talk about it and just like, if that happens, I would be thrilled, but I don't see any world where it happens. The last one on this list, Austin. I don't know if Mark just said, you know what, the hell with it. I'm going to just throw one on here to wrap this bad boy up. Put Paul Goldschmidt on the list. I mean, unless you're getting like a great deal on him, like unless you're getting a Paul Goldschmidt. I'm 37 years old. I want to sign like a reestablished spot at Great America Ballpark where I can bump my numbers up and sign another deal. But he's 37. Like, I don't know how many more deals he's gonna have left. I just don't see this as a viable option. I am the biggest Christian Encarnacion Strand believer out there. And if you had to tell me, could I have Christian Encarnacion Strand or Paul Goldschmidt? I know people are going to turn off the podcast right now. I'm taking Christian Encarnacion Strand, damn it.
No, and I would honestly agree with you. I don't think this makes sense really at all. To your point about kind of being thrown in there, but it just seems like we kind of already have a logjam of guys that are kind of that first baseman DH type role with CES, Candelario, Steer probably is somewhat in that area, and probably guys that I'm even forgetting at this point. I know they used Espinal as a DH, last year. I don't necessarily see him doing that this year, but it just seems like we already have a lot of options that Paul Goldschmidt doesn't really solve any of our problems enough to warrant bringing him in. I mean, it'd be great if he could play left field or third base, but I don't. That's obviously not happening. So I don't know. It's a good name. I maybe you'd sell some jerseys, but I just don't think production wise it would make much sense really at all. So I hope that's not the move the Reds make, but I don't think that they would.
Yeah, I don't think so. It just doesn't seem like it would fit. But again, if Goldschmidt is okay with signing a really small deal, I mean, sure, but I've seen projections to land a $25 million contract.
No way. Yeah, at least I don't
like
want to pay that.
it just would not make at all sense for the Reds to spend any sort of money on another first base DH. I mean, you can go find like let's say CES and Candelario are your options right now, and Spencer Steer probably also gets thrown into that mix if you go get an outfielder, right? I mean, that's 3 options there. If it
Bring
doesn't
Ty
work,
France back.
yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
If you can't, if those guys don't pan out, if you get to May and it's not working with whatever trio you end up deciding, however you end up shaking it out, like you can go find a first base DH. Like the Reds got Ty France in the middle of the season. Like it's the easiest position to find. I have a hard time allocating dollars to that right now just because I think it's the smallest need. I know the Reds' numbers at DH were atrocious last year, but I think everything went wrong for that to be that. I mean, even if Matt McLain doesn't get hurt, Matt McLain getting hurt last year was one of the biggest reasons the Reds' DH numbers were so bad. But if McLain wasn't hurt, a lot of those DH at-bats would have gone to Jonathan India, who would have been a lot better than anything else or whoever else. And and Marte getting suspended was such a chain effect that Reds ended up just throwing people at the DH to kind of fill that spot. I mean, they had Santiago Espinal DH at times last year. Whereas this year, going into the year, they shouldn't have to throw guys there. It should be someone like Candelario or CES that they at least somewhat want to put there.
I 100% agree. And yeah, I think we might be somewhat agreement, but I'd be curious, I guess, going into the winter meetings, what would be your biggest target kind of position that you're looking for? For me, I think it's a corner outfielder, but I just, are you on the same page? Or are you thinking maybe I know I'm missing something there?
Yeah, I mean, mine's Tyler O'Neill. I think Tyler O'Neill's the best fit for the Reds. But again, if it's someone like Conforto or Kepler, I'm fine with that too. I'm really interested in Alec Boehm of the Phillies. Working a trade there. I've seen there was some reporting that the Mariners were interested, and the Phillies wanted George Kirby back, like an established starter. It's like, yeah, I don't know about that. That would be hard for me. I could maybe do like an Abbott for Bohm swap if the Phillies are throwing something else at me. Either it's a prospect or something else. I think that maybe could work. But a third baseman, a short term third baseman, a third baseman that's not going to block Noelvi Marte. I love that. I don't know if the Diamondbacks, I know they picked up the option on Eugenio Suarez, but they were trying to move him at the deadline. Would the Diamondbacks consider trading him? He's only got 1 year left on his deal. I think Eugenio Suarez would be a perfect stopgap to at least fill a spot in 2024, but not take the seat in 2025 that we hope and pray Noelvi Marte will take the reins of and be able to take.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about it in the past, but it was kind of wild the drop of even Candelario's defense that we kind of thought we were getting, but the gap between what we got and what we thought we were getting with him. But yeah, I mean, I think we even saw it towards the end of last year, and maybe some of it had to do just where the Reds were. That they're probably going to give Marte a lot of leeway to just figure things out. And getting a guy like Eugenio would be awesome. Don't get me wrong; I think that's a lot of fun and pretty good. But I don't know. It seems like they're willing to give Marte the chance to kind of figure things out. But maybe like you said, like your point earlier, do they give him until June, July, August, that type of range? Is it going to be in May? And then if we realizing we're not getting the production we need, then pull the trigger. But I don't know. I think I would just see at least on third they probably are going to cycle out Candelario and Marte a bit, but to your point, if those guys don't produce, it's a pretty big hole.
Yeah, I don't know if there was something with Candelario because he had a career worst year defensively after being a pretty decent defender. Certainly not a liability at third base. Hard to see guys at his age bouncing back defensively at third base. I think offensively, I see him bouncing back, but I don't know. He felt unplayable at third base, which really just made that deal brutal because the deal was him having that ability to play third base. So I don't know. I'd love to see the Reds get an upgrade there and not have to rely on Marte. I'd love to see Marte just, be penciled in to start the year at AAA, let him kind of ease into the season, let him kind of prove himself, and kind of be there as more of a fallback option. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how aggressive the Reds are on third base. It kind of felt like that, if I'm reading between the lines in the Crawl article, that's kind of what it felt like, where we're okay with just rolling with what we got at third base. But if an opportunity presents itself, we're going to jump on it. That's kind of.
Yeah, and I'm forgetting about Espinal too, I guess, in that mix. But yeah.
Yeah. And Espinal, if he had to play third base every day, it's fine. I wouldn't be too upset at that. The problem is Espinal's also your Matt McLean insurance. And that's where it could be a real problem, is if Matt McLean gets hurt, well, Espinal can't play two positions. So
Yeah, and then
you're
kind of
really.
a emergency if break glass and steer and those kind of roles too. But yeah,
I can't do steer at third base. Oh man, he was rough at third base. Yeah, I just it just would feel like you're playing like steer or Candelario at third base, and you have Ellie and McLean in the middle. It's just like you have this great middle, and then you just please don't hit the ball to the left side. I actually think CES at third base would be maybe a potential. I don't think the Reds want to do it, but I could see him end up playing third base every day if it became necessary because of injuries or whatever. Maybe even more so than Steer or Candelario going back there. I don't think Candelario is going
Yeah.
back.
Or even Ellie, you could move over there, but then it's like, who the heck are you going to put at shortstop, essentially? But yeah,
I mean, you could do McLean, but I mean,
yeah,
again, McLean gets hurt, and
yeah. I'm thinking in
yeah,
a scenario he's already
yeah,
hurt in this
yeah,
hypothetical, but yeah,
yeah, yeah. We kind of I hope I'm just overly cautious with McLean. And man, if McLean if we look up and Matt McLean has 140 games at the end of the year, I mean, man, that would be so refreshing, and maybe the biggest storyline going into the year is, can McLean stay healthy?
yeah. And I think, I don't know, like I said, it'll be interesting to see the moves that they make, but I do think a lot of their game plan, at least going into next year, is going to be banking on healthy years of these guys and rolling with the alternatives that they got. I think maybe Espinal is kind of a signal that, like, yep, we're having this guy as kind of a backup if needed. And obviously, they didn't think depth was a big enough issue getting rid of India, or maybe they projected that they'll make some moves down the line. But it shall be interesting, man. It's good to see the winter meetings be kicking off soon. And like you said, I definitely expect something to happen. So we'll have to just see.
Yeah, well, good stuff. Well, Austin, I thought we did maybe a 15-20 minute show, and here we are. We talked for an hour. When you get Nick Kirby talking baseball, it's easy. It's hard to shut it off. But appreciate your time as always, Austin. Enjoy talking ball with you. Next week, we'll have a lot of content for the winter meetings. The Bengals play on Monday night, which really kind of throws a wrench into the winter meetings. But I'll tease a little bit. We might do something where me and Trace come on at halftime of Chatterbox Bengals on Monday night. Still working on that. I'm gonna try to do something on Monday, but the Bengals playing, we do a Chatterbox as a live show during the whole Bengals game, makes it kind of challenging on Monday. But Tuesday is the draft lottery. I know that I'm gonna do a live show for that. It's at 5:30 p.m. That'll be on YouTube, and then I'll put something in a podcast form the next day for that. And then Wednesday night. We're going to do a live show probably at 9 p.m. I think Craig Sandlin's going to join that. Maybe Trace. We'll see how the spirit moves on that. But we'll try to have content throughout the winter meetings. Of course, if the Reds make a big move, as soon as I can get this thing fired up, I'll be on live, just like after the India Singer deal. So we'll have plenty of content rolling. So, as always, make sure you're subscribed to Chatterbox Sports on YouTube. There's a bell you can hit up in the top right corner that turns on notifications, so you're notified anytime that we do go live. That'll help you if there's a big trade. You can see exactly when we do go live. And then, of course, everywhere you get podcasts, make sure you're subscribed to Chatterbox Reds. All right, for Austin Layton, this is Nick Kirby. Hope you have a great rest of your week. And as always, go Reds.